That Yeats poem by the band called the Waterboys. Now, whereas 1916 is urban, he refers to sitting around the fireside in the club and grey 18th century houses, A Stolen Child is this rural, fantastical, pronouncedly mythical environment. And yet both radically different treatments cohere in the idea that death, whether it's the death of Pierce or the stolen child, is a movement into a mythological state of being. But not a monotheistic alternative universe that is not necessarily governed by the temporal and spatial dimensions of our material world or by its values. It's a place where logical contradiction is not only possible, but appears as the very grounding of meaning itself. The last line here is brilliant. It has seemed all throughout that the tragic world is something from which the child needs to be protected. Come away from this world of weeping, of sadness. Whereas in the last line, you read at the last line of the poem here as it's repeated for the fourth time. It seems that the solemn-eyed child has a greater understanding of life and is bemused by the tragic emotional investment people make in it. Why do you weep so much about something as from a world more full of weeping that he can understand? And you go, wow, because he does that thing in the same line. It's not one or the other. There's two completely contrary ways of talking about. See what I mean? And then it's hard to articulate it, because he just says it there. And you say, oh, look at that. Two completely contrary meanings in the same line. And yet they cohere, they coexist. And it doesn't stop there. The whole Yeatsian antinomies doesn't stop there, because whereas it would ordinarily be necessary to make a distinction on the one hand between a poem about revolutionaries and war and death and execution and fairies on the other hand, right? With Yeats, you can make this comparison. Because they both serve by 1916, Yeats was long embarked upon what Joyce called the Irish artist's obligation to create the uncreated conscience of our race. To it, after 800 years of occupation, the death or near death of the language, and a complete fracture with any sense of local culture as something within touching distance, something close. It's necessary to build it. That's what Joyce meant by creating the uncreated conscience of my race. And that's what Irish artists did. There's a quote here by Declan Kybert. I'll move on, but I'll just summarize this. He's basically saying that Ireland is almost singularly unique insofar as the writers precipitated the revolution. So rather than the other way around, say in America, for example, where the Declaration of Independence grounds we need to get out, and then it's a case of, okay, well, what does it mean to be American? And that precipitates a whole literature. In Ireland, it was a case of we need to establish a sense of being Irish and do it now as an alternative to England. And England is like next door, this close proximity. And that's what Yeats was all about. He basically mined Sligo, where his mother was from, collected and retransmitted all of the mythology, all of the fairy stories. You know, you hear now, Irish people, leprechauns, as though that were always the case, you know, and it's almost like Yeats, Irish people equals leprechauns. Yeah, and that sounds like such a kind of, but it's essential, absolutely essential. Now, so from his mother, he had this mythology, right, that was passed down through oral tradition. From his father, who wanted to be an artist and had this idea in a belief in poetic freedom, he got the sense of the value of being an artist and of being a writer as a career. Okay? Now, from this woman, he got the dynamism. From this woman, that was it. This signed, sealed, and delivered. It was love at first sight, and it was seismic. I'm skipping loads of stuff here. Let's get straight. Let's get to the good stuff. Maud Gonne. Yeats met Maud Gonne in 1889. At the time, Yeats had formed the Rhymers Club in London. He was living between Dublin and London. He was writing essays about symbolist poetry. He was, let's say, he was in that bubble where if he had continued along that line, he could have been a great poet. But he would have been an inwardly focused poet. He would have been in the minutiae of metaphysics. It's possible that he certainly wouldn't have had that dynamic conflict that drove pretty much everything that he wrote since. I don't think he would have that voice. I don't think he would have that anger, because Maud Gonne didn't love him, and she wouldn't love him. And he proposed and proposed and proposed, and she rejected him, and in 1903 she married John MacBride. And Yeats writes about this in his autobiographies as the worst thing that ever happened to him. She's the worst thing that happened to me. But yet she wasn't, because a magnificent poet. She came from the same Anglo-Irish stock as Yeats, but she rejected everything she stood for. She was utterly committed to the project of Irish nationalism. That was what she was, her every day, 24 hours a day, it was about liberating Ireland from England. She basically turned his world upside down. And what we get to see in the poetry, is a gloss on Yeats's gradual, how shall we say, realization that she was right. Here's a poem from 1912, No Second Troy. Why should I blame her that she filled my days with misery, or that she would of late have taught to ignorant men most violent ways, or hurled the little streets upon the great? Had they but courage equal to desire, could have made her peaceful with a mind that nobleness made simple as a fire, with beauty like a tightened bow, a kind that is not natural in an age like this, being high and solitary and most stern. Why, what could she have done, being what she is? Was there another Troy for her to burn? Now, so equation of Maud Gonne with Helen of Troy. A woman who brings about, say, the first seismic battle in recorded history. Was there another Troy for her to burn? So here you can see the conflict in Yeats here between the desire for Maud Gonne, her commitment to Irish nationalism, his infatuation with her, his belief that she couldn't do otherwise, and yet there's that ambivalence. Was there another Troy for her to burn? He wrote this in 1912. September 1913. It's a poem. In September 1913, the Irish locked out the workers. Irish Transport and General Workers Union locked out the workers for 6 weeks and made them accept lower pay. And it was seismic for Maud Gonne, it was seismic for Yeats, because it was maybe that moment in Irish history when the idea of Irish unity against English occupation, the idea of being united towards a common goal, was being undermined by economics. And Yeats had been a friend of John O'Leary. John O'Leary was one of the first members of the Fenian Brotherhood, had died by 1913, but had that great flowing romantic vision that Maud Gonne had. So you notice the difference here between the ambivalence of No Second Troy and this. The woman with yellow hair is a reference to Maud Gonne herself. What need you, being come to sense, but fumble in a greasy till, and add the halfpence to the pence, and prayer to shivering prayer, until you have dried the marrow from the bone? For men were born to pray and save. Romantic Ireland's dead and gone. It's with O'Leary in the grave. Yet they were of a different kind, the names that stilled your childish play. They have gone about the world like wind. But little time had they to pray for whom the hangman's rope was spun. And what, God help us, could they save? Romantic Ireland's dead and gone. It's with O'Leary in the grave. Was it for this the wild geese spread the grey wing upon every tide? For this that all that blood was shed? For this Edward Fitzgerald died? And Robert Emmet and Wolfe Tone? All that delirium of the brave? Romantic Ireland's dead and gone. It's with O'Leary in the grave. Yet could we turn the years again and call those exiles as they were in all their loneliness and pain? You'd cry, some woman's yellow hair has maddened every mother's son. They weighed so lightly what they gave, but let them be. They're dead and gone. They're with O'Leary. 1913. Then shortly after that, Easter 1916. And this, written in 1919. This is a great poem. This, if anything, gets me back to the oppositions in Yeats, or that conflict, the antinomies between 1 and 2, the choices. Ireland declared neutral in the First World War, the famous phrase, neither king nor Kaiser. But in the first 12 months, over 100,000 people signed up to join the British Army, cognizant of the need to fight. So this poem is called An Irish Airman Foresees His Death. I know that I shall meet my fate somewhere among the clouds above. Those that I fight I do not hate. Those that I guard I do not love. My country is Kiltartan Cross. My countrymen Kiltartan's poor. No likely end could bring them loss or leave them happier than before. Nor law nor duty bade me fight, nor public men nor cheering crowds. A lonely impulse of delight drove to this tumult in the clouds. I balanced all, brought all to mind. The years to come seemed waste of breath, years behind. In balance with this life, this death.